Welcome to this wonderful event. My name's Carl Matheson. I'm a senior climate correspondent at Politico. We're here today to talk about the clean energy technology that is driving the European Green Deal. Now, the European Green Deal turns one this week, and I think after a year, it's clear that there's a gap between its enormous ambition to make Europe the first carbon neutral continent by 2050, and the reality of what that takes. There's a huge ambition, but maybe a lack of understanding about how we actually get there. And so we've got a really interesting panel today to try and unpick some of the answers, because it will lie in part in innovation. Our partner Eni has made this panel possible, and thank you so much to all of you for joining us. I want to just go through how you can participate. There's obviously on Twitter, you can use the hashtag #CleanEnergyTech, and please tweet us at Politico Events. We're also using Slido, that's sli.do, and you can go on there, and that's where you can ask questions. And if you can use that, it's our events website. There'll be a window next to the live stream where you can ask us questions and also and just participate. And then on Facebook or Twitter, you can go to sli.do. That's how it works. And there's also on there, on Slido, there's a poll which was presented by Eni. Please get involved. I can see the numbers already jumping up in front of me on the poll. The question is, which of these technologies has the biggest potential to impact efforts to reach net zero emissions? And the options are hydrogen, carbon capture, solar, wind, nuclear fusion, or other renewables. So please get involved. Before we get started on the panel, I want to just ask Lapo Pistelli, who's the Director of Public Affairs from Eni. Hi, Lapo. Thank you for being with us. Would you like to make some opening remarks to set this panel up?
Yeah, thank you, Carl, and thank you to all the friends of Politico and the distinguished panelists for this very timely opportunity to exchange views on such a topic. Because I have a few minutes, let me address this session very frankly. I think that there is no need anymore to advocate for energy transition and the fight against climate change. My impression is that, at least in Europe, we are all on board. Politics, academia, stakeholders, media, our own families, from grandma to little kids. On the other hand, I think that the real need now is not about focusing on the final destination, but about the milestones and all that is required to get there. And obviously, technology is and will be one of the most important pillars of this challenge. I'm not surprised because at the end of the day, the history of energy has always been, since the beginning, a history of innovation. And the incredible step changes that happen in our lives in the last 200 years depend very much on energy innovation. But what we hope to see in the next decade is somehow unprecedented. Innovation and learning curves about it usually have their own pace. But in the case of energy transition, because of the high ambition and the limited time available, we have to boost the speed of innovation and the learning curves. Uh, I guess that we are more used to innovation in the digital world. You can see that when a new iPhone is ready, it takes days or hours to update our skills and use the new devices and the new apps. But innovation in energy requires to transform the industrial infrastructure, a whole set of final products, and the new uses of energy. And so it seems to me that it takes time to make real breakthrough. It takes time to put them on the ground. It takes time and new rules to set a market, demand and supply. Think about the potential multiple uses of hydrogen. It takes money to help people and companies to transit from one model to another. In a nutshell, energy transition is not the transformation of a pumpkin in a carriage like the Cinderella fairy tale, but it's a complex strategy where we need to align demand and supply, companies and customers, rules and financing. On our point of view, Eni is an energy company that stretches all along the energy value chain, Actually, we have around 8,000 proprietary patents, 600 of which are related to new renewable energies. We are working on a variety of issues: traditional carbon capture, new forms of CO2 uses like the mineralization of CO2, the biofixation with microalgae, biofuels with new advanced feedstock, palm oil free, different methods for waste to energy, waste to methanol, waste to hydrogen, new biophotovoltaic panels that do not need to be disposed of, and sea waves conversion in energy. This is the reason why also our affiliation landscape and engagement with new stakeholders is changing. We recently joined Ocean Energy Europe and European Clean Hydrogen Alliance, just to give an example. So, just to conclude, um, we have an ambitious target and little time to achieve it. Innovation in energy can't happen overnight. If we want to transform the way we produce, the way we consume, and if we want to protect the European economic environment in this big shift. And I think that we need all technologies because at the moment there's no silver bullet for transition. Therefore, for me, the role of politics is not an internal competition about increasing ambitions and expectations and shortening the time to get there. But the role of politics is about involving all stakeholders in a well aware debate about the new rules, the public boost on innovation investment, and some smart rules to set the new, actually not existing markets, either from demand and supply view. I can say, and this is my last statement, that the reaction to COVID and the race for vaccine provide some good lessons for European environment. I hope that these few remarks will help to trigger a fantastic debate, and thank you all.
Thank you so much, Lapo. Before we move on to our panel discussion, just wanted to again remind you about the many modes of participation. Please, if you go on to sli.do Slido, you can watch and ask us questions there and participate in the poll, but also tweet us at Politico Events. I'm joined online, sadly not in person, by a wonderful panel today. Remy Gruet is the Chief Executive Officer of Ocean Energy Europe, which is a trade organisation. Jean-Éric Paquet unfortunately had to last minute join a council meeting, and so he's going to be replaced by his colleague Patrick Child, who's Deputy Director General of DG Energy Research and Innovation. So thank you so much, Patrick, for joining us at such short notice, but we're really glad to have you here. Niels Rook is the Executive President for Sustainability at Sintef, which is a Scandinavian Research and Development Institute. And Mechthild Worsdorfer is Director of Sustainability, Technology and Outlooks at the International Energy Agency. And I've had some wonderful pre-conversations with this group, and it's been fascinating. So I'm really looking forward to joining all of you. Thank you so much. I wanted to start by, I guess, addressing my own, as I think Lapo put it, a pumpkin. I wanted to pretend that I have a fantastic idea, say an innovation in tidal energy technology. I'm an entrepreneur, and I want to make that come to fruition. I want to make that idea come to fruition and then to scale and make a real difference in both my own business, but also to the carbon emissions of Europe and the world. So I think talking to each of you about basically what you can do for me would be really a helpful way to start. So Remy, I guess I might come to you first and say, how can you help me? How do we do this?
Sure. Well, in fact, we have these type of calls or emails on a regular basis. There are a number of innovators in Europe, and they often try and get to the next stage. So Ocean Energy Europe is essentially a trade association. We do a service to our members who are people from the sector. So they can be manufacturers of devices, they can be project developers. There are a number of universities, applied or not. There are even regions who've identified tidal and wave as and OTEC, ocean energy technologies, as a good economic opportunity for them. So we do a lot of policy work, so informing the European Commission and others on how to help the sector. And then for people like yourselves, like people with a project, we help you access EU funding. We'll tell you where it is. We'll go and see Patrick Child and tell him, listen, I've got this great guy right here, and he's got this great project. Do you have a call for him? And then, yeah, see whether we can help you with that.
And Niels, what's the difference here? Because I guess I would come to you at the same time and say, can you help me develop this and build a prototype, or what's your role?
So our role is really to help in developing this idea into a pilot or prototype. And by that also, as said by Remy here, to pool resources for that to happen. But the difference is that we have researchers which can help in this space, not only researchers, but also tools for research, meaning research infrastructures, where you can test and develop from smaller scale to larger scale. And we will accompany this with a cooperative mind, also including RTOs from outside Norway, or it could also be with the universities, and to pool up a resource base and knowledge base to make this happen, and what kind of financing possibilities accompanying that. And it could be both public funding or mixed funding, or it could also be direct industrial funding. So going the whole innovation chain, so to speak.
And speaking of funding, Patrick, I need to come to you now. I've got my sort of great team behind me. We've got the technology to a certain point. What does a nascent technology have to do to win the backing of the European Union? I think you're on mute, Patrick. Sorry.
First of all, I would say it's a great moment for us to be having this conversation, because the European Union, of course, is strongly leading the global debate on climate and clean energy. And with the changing geopolitical landscape, we expect that to be even more exciting in the coming months. And as we're all working on the sort of post-COVID recovery strategies around the green and digital transition, there's a huge amount of investment, in particular coming from different public sources, into these important priorities. The Commission offer to provide, I think two things. Firstly, the policy direction. And there we've had, in the context of the European Green Deal, we've set a pretty clear set of priorities in the last months on how we see different components of the energy system coming together, the importance of things like electrification, the circular economy, energy efficiency. So I'd hope that your idea would have some of these components in it in order to fit into our policy agendas. And then when it comes to funding, again, it's a great moment. Looking at research and innovation in particular, we have an open call at the moment specifically linked to the European Green Deal. So for each of the main thematic elements in the Green Deal, we have specific topics which are open today. So you would have to come together with a group of other promoters from different member states, different sectors, maybe a research organization, but with a strong coalition we could help you put together. If your idea is a little bit more mature, we've also got an ongoing action very strongly from what we call the Innovation Fund. This is something where we use the money that's generated from the EU's carbon emissions trading scheme to redistribute for things like investment into scaling up and building up of business ideas in areas like renewable energy, your business area. And then, of course, for the future, we're working on our next research and innovation framework program, Horizon Europe, as part of our next generation of funding instruments under the multi-annual financial framework, where we have a whole cluster of activities around energy, mobility, and climate, which will give, I think, many opportunities for renewables, as well as a new instrument, which may be particularly relevant for your business idea, which is the European Innovation Council, a new way of supporting starting up and scaling taking the really excellent ideas that we get from the research communities in Europe into sort of commercial success stories. And within this European Innovation Council, we will have a particular focus on the themes of the Green Deal as well. So, as I say, great moment to be having the conversation, and a lot will be coming from the European Union to support this transition. Of course, that's only part of the story. We need a lot of private funding, private investment from our big industrial partners. A whole range of new summits in Europe, which will make that happen in areas like hydrogen, in areas like clean energy transition and batteries. And we need also to work closely with our member states, which we are doing. So thanks.
Patrick, are there any barriers that I might face, or that you see commonly between getting to the next step with the Commission, trying to take part in those various facilities that Patrick has described?
Well, I mean, it's a very competitive landscape. Huh? I mean, we are sometimes embarrassed by our own success. I mean, that when the EU publishes, for example, research and innovation calls for proposals, we usually are able to fund something like 15%, 14, 15% of the really good proposals that we get. We try now, and this is something we're going to do in the future, I hope more, than to build synergies with other programs. So good projects which don't quite make the cut for funding under the research program directly can get what's called a seal of excellence, a sort of badge which then enables them to perhaps have a more credible chance at having funding, for example, for national allocations of EU structural funds, our regional funding programs. The main challenge that we hear from our communities is that we have such a competitive program that success rates aren't always straightforward. I think the other thing that we're going to try and do better in the future, and with our new InvestEU program, providing a sort of single sort of overall umbrella for the way that we support businesses in the European Union. We also need to do better at finding a sort of way into the system, and then partners like, as Remy has said, and also Niels and others can also help working with their stakeholder communities to find their way through. But I think that the opportunities are out there. With Horizon Europe, we're expecting, following the discussions between Europe's leaders, to have an increased budget for the next phase, and so we hope that this sort of pressure on our overall budgets will be a bit easier. I mean, I'd much prefer us to be choosing between a large number of really excellent proposals, which is the situation that we're in, than the reverse, of course.
Mechthild, I just want to ask you, is there a magic ingredient or set of ingredients that are needed for a technology to come from an idea and a prototype to something that really breaks through at scale, that is going to kind of match certain other more mature renewable energy technologies?
So thank you very much. And I would just say that I agree what has just been said, that there's a good moment because there is the European Green Deal, obviously, but there is also other partners around the world who are setting up net zero pledges. And we saw it from Japan, Korea, even China by 2060. So I think this net zero pledges will highlight, or is already highlighting, that we cannot do it without a long and a big focus on technologies. And I would tend to agree that there needs to be a range of technologies, and I'm sure we're coming back to that, and that we need to accelerate innovation. And the IEA, my team in the technology perspectives, we have recently released a report on innovation, and we have studied 400 clean energy technologies and in which different stages they are. I mean, prototype, demonstration, early adoption, and mature. And if we look in the context of net zero and clean energy transitions, what you said, we have now actually only roughly 25% of globally. I mean, I speak globally, Europe is always a bit better and in the forefront, but globally, only 25% of those technologies are mature. I mean, hydropower, nuclear, many others which are running and so on. But to become net zero, a lot of them are I would say around 40%, are at a stage of early adoption. And that are technologies which are there, but still quite expensive, or they still need policy support. And that's also the case for Europe. If you look at electric vehicles or fuel cells cars or any other technology which is there, but still quite expensive. And I'm sure we will come back to these questions as well. And even more so, if you speak about 25% mature, 40% early adoption, it still makes 35% in prototype or demonstration phase. And that is absolutely needed, these technologies, when, for example, we speak about energy intensive industries where we need some type of hydrogen or some other kind of CCUS in order to capture the emissions which are there, and where electrification is not possible. So to answer your question, I think we need to pay more attention to innovation and technologies. We need to grade the market that this not mature technology can grow. And there is obviously the European policy, the European market is important, but I would also say it's also important to look international and see what can be done at a larger scale, at a larger region, or in exchange with others.
Not to kind of labour the point about this tidal technology, but with electricity in particular, we've got wind and solar, and battery prices are dropping really rapidly. And I'm just wondering what the point in my innovation would be. Are there in particular areas, and this maybe Mechtilde, but also Remy, you might want to respond to this. But Mechtilde, are there particular areas where there's a kind of like inbuilt obsolescence already? And I guess then the question is there a danger that we're putting public and investor money into projects that just won't be needed?
I mean, there's always a risk, and as it was said, we need much more investments, clean energy and technology investments. And if we look at this year, 2020, a difficult year for many reasons, we also saw that investments in clean energy technologies went down by 18%. So we need to accelerate, speed up, make everything possible, as I said before, to make all technology. I wouldn't go for only one or two. I think, as ENI also said in the opening statement, there might be different solutions for electrification, which is a clear priority. Do as much as possible on the renewable side, and I'm sure Remy will speak more on the ocean technology, which is a future technology where I think there is a lot of potential and opportunities, but there is other technologies which we need for other sectors, like, as I mentioned, industry or transport, or where we cannot electrify. So I would really go for a wide as possible range and set the right framework, which the European Union and Horizon program does, give many renewables a chance to grow and scale up. And that can only happen with the support, not only the financial support, but I would really underline also the policy support from governments and the private support from companies.
Rem, why should we spend European Union taxpayers' money supporting the innovation of technologies to generate power from the ocean when we already have very mature, very cheap wind, solar, and potentially battery tech?
Thank you for asking my favorite question, or asking it in the way I prefer. Indeed, we often get asked the question, why do we need ocean energy? We have wind, we have solar. And the answer is very simple, is you have wind and solar, and today they are already the cheapest technologies in many markets across the world and in Europe. And we know that tomorrow they will be, definitely, they're not already today, the cheapest technologies everywhere in the world. I mean, one of them, whether it's going to be PV or wind, depends on the local conditions. So what we know is that we have two variable technologies who are imminently cheaper. So what we want to reach at the lowest cost net zero energy system by 2050 is basically to maximize the possible penetration of those technologies into the mix. And to do that, you require a number of flexibility solutions. So of course, we've all heard of energy efficiency, of storage. Some of us have heard of demand response and the fact of using basically the consumer side of energy to match demand and supply on the market. And ocean energy is basically a niche generation technology that on top of it generate electricity. So it's not only that you're providing flexibility, but you also provide electricity. So it's a really good way to provide flexibility. And the reason why ocean energy provides flexibility is different according to which technology you're looking at. If you look at tidal, well, it's eminently predictable. I can tell you today how much a turbine in the channel between France and the UK is going to produce on Wednesday, the 3rd of November, 2027. I can tell you today, because we know exactly how the tides work and we know exactly how it's going to affect the electricity production. So from a grid management perspective, obviously you don't need to plan to 7 years ahead, but day ahead, 6 hours ahead is really a big help to grid management, and it helps having a bigger share of variable renewables such as wind and solar, to have technologies which are eminently predictable. And wave has a different advantage. The waves we use are mostly generated by the wind. So when the wind starts, the wind turbine starts spinning, the waves start building, and then the wave devices start generating electricity as well. And when the wind stops, the wave devices will continue to generate electricity for a number of hours after the wind has stopped. So obviously, when you have a system on which you will have a combination of solar, wind, storage, and, for example, wave energy, you have a much better management ability when it comes to consumption peaks and production peaks. And you have a much better understanding of how the system works, and you have much more, essentially, flexibility, and enables you to have a higher penetration of wind and solar, again, who are going to be the cheapest. So I think it's really the main reason. Obviously, ocean energy is a new industrial sector, so we are creating jobs. We've seen that jobs in renewables per megawatt hour, there are more jobs created than in fossil fuels. So typically in gas or coal electricity generation. There are good reasons on the environmental side. There are good reasons on local economic development. But for me, the question you've asked is the key reason why we should develop ocean energy.
Niels, do you want to just address this idea? Because I'm still slightly confused. It's and I'd like to ask Patrick this question in a minute too, because it seems like the message is that there's that we should be investing in everything, and I'm just wondering, are there technologies that you see as having these new nascent technologies that you see as really having futures, and some that you don't?
So, in principle, I fully agree. You need to have all these kind of solutions, and there is no one size fits all here. It's also depending on the boundary conditions and where I can use them. Talking about Europe. Europe has a very diverse geography, and the energy systems, they vary wildly. I know this from my work as president of the European Energy Research Alliance, for instance, traveling from Czech Republic to Finland, going to Sweden, and then back to Brussels. The energy systems are so different, and what it fits is not the same. Obviously, you would have a hard time selling tidal or wave energy for Austria, for instance. But so that's the argument for that we need all of these technologies. But I want to touch into one item here, which Mechtild mentioned. I see there's a discourse between the policies in terms of what are the really, what is needed now. We're talking about being climate neutral by 2050. And then when reading the competitiveness progress report, which was part of the State of the Union speech and activities, we see that research in these areas are actually dropping. I'm then not talking about the EU framework programs, which is increasing, but if you look to some of the member states and associated countries in Europe, and it's actually a global thing. It's dropping. This is obviously a very strange feature when you know that you need to scale up massively. Some of the technologies we're talking about, let's talk about electrolyzers. In Europe, you need to scale up maybe by 1,000 for 2050, or even to 2030. You need to scale up by hundreds. If you look to CCS until 2050, well, you need to scale up by maybe 1,000 batteries, 50, and the list goes on. So it's a huge challenge. I'm not saying that we won't do this and we won't be able to do it, but I think it's really key that the innovation cycle is and the funding capital markets are looking into these as a possibility, and that there is a stronger link between what we are saying that we're going to achieve and what we're actually doing on the ground.
Is that being driven by the kind of excitement and success of other, like, just to not to bang on about wind and solar, but is that where that money is going, or is it what's scaring investors off? Any of you could answer that.
Well,
Patrick.
maybe I could come in, Patrick. I mean, firstly, if I could answer your earlier question about, why do we bother to invest in the sort of more disruptive, more sort of upstream technologies when we've got really solid PV and wind already very mature. I mean, I think the answer is partly what Remy says about the sort of different characteristics of ocean energy, but it's also what Neil said about the massive increase in the scale of the need for electricity from all sources that we're going to have if we're going to achieve the full decarbonisation by 2050, and a massive electrification across the board of many, many sectors. And so, the limits on our physical capacity to install PV panels, to deploy wind turbines. It's why, for example, we're putting so much emphasis at the moment on offshore wind rather than fixed installations, because we're running out of shallow seas where we can install the large-scale wind turbines that we need. And so if we can have an opportunity for new technologies to enter the market and help us, on this massive scaling up of electrification, then ocean energy is a possible thing. And I'm grateful to Niels for mentioning the Clean Energy Competitive Report that we published just a few days ago as part of our State of the Energy Union. I mean, and there we highlight, I think, 6 or 7 areas, of which ocean energy is one. Also offshore wind, solar, renewable hydrogen, batteries, and smart grids, as the things where we see, the most opportunity for progress, and therefore opportunities also for successful European commercial activities to develop, and also, therefore have an impact globally. So I think that those are that's the sort of broader context that we're operating in, and so I'm all for pursuing what we're doing in the ocean as well.
Mathilde, just I wanted to ask you to address one thing. The IEA is sort of consistently underestimated the growth of these sort of more mature renewable technologies. Is there what's preventing that sort of underestimation happening with these more nascent technologies? How can you be certain about your projections for them?
Well, I would have 3 comments. First of all, on your question, we are doing the World Energy Outlook since more than 20 years and different scenarios. And there are scenarios, they are not forecast. And what we see with the renewables in particular, that the price and the cost for solar, offshore wind, onshore wind have gone down dramatically. And we have been following that, and we are revising every year our assumption for cost for all the renewables as for any other energy resource. So if you have followed our this year's WEO, World Energy Outlook 2020, we had a huge potential for renewables in the electricity sector globally. And one of our main message out of the WEO was solar is the new king. meaning the solar capacity in Europe and globally will lead the renewables and the future clean energy transition. So with our regular updates, I think we have been really neutral and fair and give the input to our scenarios, and depending on which one you go, the baseline or the one which needs to be done for being aligned with the Paris Agreement, we see a lot of renewables. We see a lot of potential for energy efficiency and other sources and other technologies, depending, as it was said, a little bit on the region and the country and the context. Secondly, maybe a comment to what Patrick just said. I fully agree that electrification is the future, and we need to push electrification, and we need all sources to do and electrify end-use sectors and others. But for the time being, there are some limitations for electrification, like in the hard-to-abate sectors. And that is cement, steel, chemicals. And they are responsible for a lot of CO2 emissions globally, 2 to 7%, depending on the sector. So we have to tackle that as well. And those sectors for the time being cannot be electrified. And there, I think technologies and innovation can play a huge role if we can really upscale technologies like hydrogen, sustainable hydrogen, green hydrogen, or CCS, CCS to get the carbon out. So there are technologies which we need to scale up, and sectors where we need to look as well, in addition to, I fully agree, electrification as a future for most sectors, but there are some limitations for hard-to-abate industry or long-distance transport, where innovation and technology need to be further developed. And I know there are some promising projects here as well in Europe, which can give the lead. Thank you.
So we've got this enormous need for investment, a shrinking pool globally of research money, and all these different technologies, I assume, competing for that pot. And on the one hand, you might have CCS and then a tidal company. So I think that paints a really interesting competitive picture. I wanted to just move on slightly to regulation and the way that the European Commission sort of places some regulatory barriers in front of these technologies. And my colleagues yesterday published an excellent report on the draft from the Trans-European Networks for Energy, which is the regulation that decides the criteria for projects of common interest. So the projects that Europe really gets behind. And Patrick, I just wanted to ask: is that there was a recognition in that of the problems created by red tape, and I just wondered if this is a kind of acknowledgement that these are barriers to innovation.
Well, I mean, we work a lot on, of course, trying to create the best regulation to facilitate, to support the deployment of the European Green Deal, and that means tackling the obstacles that we recognise are out there to some of the sort of very, very large scale challenges and transitions that we're trying to work on. I mean, I think you also have to recognize the European Commission is not working completely in a vacuum, and that there's some very big industrial interests out there. There's some strong national priorities and concerns, and we have to navigate the best sort of approaches to make progress. I mean, personally, I still think that in our overall energy system, for example, we are giving much too much support in terms of both the sort of regulatory framework and the public subsidies for fossil fuels. And of course, that's something that we've been discussing for a while and not yet made all the progress that we would like. And there are well understood reasons for that. So I think, though, that what's important is that we need to keep in mind what I would call the innovation principle. That when we are framing new pieces of EU legislation or other sort of texts which provide sort of norms or leadership to industrial development, that we keep the innovation potential in mind, so that we are not creating unintended or avoidable regulatory obstacles to the progress that we want to see. And I think that is also at the heart of some of the policy texts that we have been presenting recently as part of the European Green Deal. And I've mentioned in particular the sector integration sort of overall framing text for the future energy systems that we'd like to see, which puts a lot of emphasis on getting the regulatory environment as innovation friendly and as compatible and supportive of our Green Deal objectives as we possibly can.
Thanks, Patrick. I want to bring in Remy and Niels on this. Are you facing barriers to getting projects to the European Union to scale because there's these kind of like it's just frankly difficult to jump through all the hoops?
You go first, Niels.
Well, okay, yeah. Well, as Patrick said, in the start, it's really a competitive landscape, but that's something we have to live with. I think that if we look to energy, I mean, this used to be ruled by supply and that it was cheap. And then you have the climate issue, which puts also a cap on what kind of energies we're talking about. And now there is also the full environmental envelope, the whole sustainability issue about the energy. And I think that is something which is often overseen, that we cannot just impose technological solutions without knowing that this is integrated solution for the biodiversity, ecology, and societal acceptance. I think that's key, and it's a new kind of cap on these kind of activities. And we can see that now. I mean, we know the the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which is kind of underlying or overarching this. And now we see the European Sustainable Finance Taxonomy, which are trying to quantify this. What can be deemed as sustainable and progressing towards the European Green Deal. I think there's a lot of good work done there, but we must be cautious not to limit some of the activities and that we are hindering the capital forces to put efforts into very important areas. And I think one of them, to mention one, is the ability to store and to isolate CO2 from coming out in the atmosphere. And those kind of activities, which can include what was mentioned by Mestil, the hard to abate sectors, but it also includes hydrogen. And I understand now there's a big discussion about what kind of hydrogen should be part of the council conclusions on the hydrogen market. And I think we need to think about what is the ultimate goal we're trying to reach, and that is a climate neutral continent by 2050. And if you can produce that by other ways than electrolysis and in a kind of zero emission environment, why should we put a cap on that? I'm happy to see that the present taxonomy is still within that remit, but for instance, on the carbon negative solution, so actually taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, which is coined sometimes as sucking CO2 out of the air. I think those kind of technologies also needs to be really encouraged because it's going to be needed.
I want to actually bring in a question from our audience on related to this, and it's addressed to Patrick. It's from Christopher Jones at the Florence School of Regulation. Patrick, Christopher's asking, will the Horizon... Are you old pals?
Yeah. We know each other for a long time, yeah. But it's good to hear from you. I'm glad you're connected.
Hi, Christopher. So he's asking, will the Horizon Europe funding package, will it take a technology neutral approach or will it pick winners? So, for example, on hydrogen, will it tender projects on the basis of greenhouse gas savings or the subsidies that it require?
Our general approach is to be technology neutral. I mean, we want to set the sort of the direction of travel, what we want to achieve, but we want the good ideas on what are the best technologies to achieve what we're setting out for, coming from the research community, coming from the people who are bringing projects to the table. I mean, of course, our calls have to contain certain criteria, certain objectives, certain framing conditions, and so, for example, in the context of the European Green Deal call that I mentioned earlier, this 1 billion package which is open at the moment, we have got a call for a project for a large-scale demonstration hydrogen electrolyzer project. And so we define in fairly clear terms what it is that we're looking for in this project. But then there's an open market for different sponsors, different technologies to come forward in a fairly balanced way. So we try and be as technology neutral as we can, but while, of course, within our calls, providing some sort of sense of direction, some framing conditions that, of course, need to guide what we want to achieve.
I wanted to sort of zoom out a little bit because we've been very Europe focused, and the Green Deal is obviously an important policy signal, market signal. But those signals are also coming from around the world. Earlier this year in September, China announced that it would become net zero by 2060, so just 10 years after the EU. And the size of China's market and the innovation there, I'm curious, Mechthild, are there any areas where Europe is just going to get killed on innovation? Are there any areas that you look at Europe and you think, that's a real weakness? They're so far behind, they're not going to be able to catch up. They're just going to be superseded by these big emerging economies and the innovation coming out of there.
So thank you. First of all, I think Europe is doing great. The European Green Deal is the most comprehensive, I think, strategy covering energy, climate, technology, internal market, investments. So European has the right strategy, and it's putting a lot of money in that strategy and combines it with a digital transition. So I think Europe is leading in many ways. As you said, China announced a month ago that they would like to peak emissions by 2030 and be net zero by 2060. We have seen Japan announcing net zero by 2050 and a few others. In a global world, this is very good news. Europe is responsible for 8% of the global CO2 emissions, China roughly for 25%. And then if you add up the others who have announced, I think this is a good signal. But everyone needs to look at its own strength. If we take hydrogen, EU has a very ambitious hydrogen strategy. Some of the EU members, Germany, France, others, have set up hydrogen strategies. But China is very fast. They have set up and put a lot of focus on hydrogen as well. So there is always a risk, even though that Europe is leading in many ways, as I said, that others catch up quickly. And we saw it to a certain extent with batteries. We saw it to a certain extent for solar PV in the past, that we need to keep Europe's competitiveness. And even though they might lead now, it's not say that others are not catching up. So a good look and exchange eventually with others might be a way out. I think international cooperation on many of these technologies could help Europe and the others. There is Mission Innovation, I know, which is very active in collaborating together on innovation. China is part of it. The EU is very active, and many others. We as the IEA, we do technology collaborative programs on hydrogen, on many other issues where we bring the experts together. So I think the strength of working together should be highlighted here as well, keeping in mind that the competitiveness issue is obviously something to watch.
Yeah, it's an enormous geopolitical question because it will eventually it'll change who controls the new energy economy, and so I'm really sort of curious about how if we're seeing a dearth in global research for this type of so I wanted to come back to the issue that Niels raised before, and I don't understand in this sense why, when there's a global competition going on, why there's a dearth of innovation cash. Mechtil, maybe you could just explain that to me in brief, and then we can jump onto a couple of other listener questions. I think you're on mute, Mechtil. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I had a technical issue right now. That's why I was on mute. I didn't get the question. Can you just repeat it? Because there was no sound thing.
Perhaps maybe Patrick, you could come in on this. Actually, would you?
Yeah, I think you're being perhaps more negative than I would be. I mean, what we are seeing is an unfortunate slight drop off in the level of publicly funded and privately funded research and innovation activities in clean energy around the world. And this is what the IEAs figures Mechtil was talking about earlier. That doesn't mean that there is necessarily, we would all like to see more, but it's not a dramatic situation. And it's something that through, for example, Mission Innovation, this global coalition of leading countries of which the European Union has been a strong partner, we are committed to working together to double our publicly funded research into clean energy technologies over the 5-year period since the Paris Agreement, and we are pretty much on track. So the 24, 25 countries in Mission Innovation, which are the leaders in the field, are holding up this sustained increase, including the United States, who were under the Obama administration very much in the lead on setting up Mission Innovation, that even in the recent years, with a different political context in the US, have maintained and even increased to some extent their investment in this field. And we're all looking forward, of course, to seeing the new Biden administration and having opportunities to re-engage with them on this agenda. So, I wouldn't say that the picture is quite as bleak as you would say, but I do absolutely agree with Mechtil that we do need to work together with what is, I think, a growing recognition across the world that we need to do more on clean energy innovation. And there, I think the challenge for Europe is that we have a magnificent track record in producing really good technology, really good ideas. But then, as we've seen in areas like PV and batteries and perhaps others, we need to maintain our competitive advantage, our strength, to avoid being swamped by other actors like China, where the economies of scale and their ability to mobilize resources is rather different from our own. And that is a lot of what we're addressing in this report with the Energy Union on the competitiveness of our energy innovation systems.
I just wanted to bring in when you're talking about funding, because there's a question from Greg Arrowsmith from UREC. He's asking the Horizon Europe trilogue, which I think is going on right now, which is why your colleague has where your colleague is. He's asking. Greg's asking, the Horizon Europe trilogue is happening. Should at least half of the €4 billion of new money found during the EP Council negotiations be going directly to climate and energy?
And what we have in the legal text for Horizon Europe is a commitment to at least 35% of the overall research and innovation budget for the next 6-7 years on climate action, which is a larger proportion than for the 30% for the EU budget as a whole. And I think that's a really clear signal of our commitment to the objectives of the European Green Deal, and that applies to the 91 billion euros that was part of our original package following the European Council agreement last July, and the 4 billion top-up that we very much welcome coming out of the trilogues that have been taking place in the recent days. So I can certainly reassure Greg that we are going to make strong use of the additional money in Horizon Europe to support the work that we'll be doing more generally on the European Green Deal in support of our climate and energy objectives.
Niels, were you satisfied earlier? I mean, you raised this issue of a kind of a dip in the funding. Were you satisfied by Patrick's comments?
No, I mean, I understand his comments, but I don't think I'm quite reassured, because when I look at the scaling needed, and when we look to the numbers in the competitiveness progress report, I wish we could have the slides here actually, you could see that we're actually spending less in Europe, 500 million less in clean energy now than we did in 2010. And then we, and I mean, in between we have raised the bar quite significantly. So there is a discourse here, and I really would like to see that we fulfill the kind of missions like in mission innovation, which Patrick mentioned, which is doubling. I mean, mission innovation was initiated because the fact that it is only 1.8% of the public funding in the world which goes to clean energy, and we're facing the world's largest problem, and that's doesn't quite match, does it? So that was the doubling. But the question is, I mean, how are we going to achieve this without massive investment? I'm not only talking about public money, also private money. And I don't quite manage to square this myself, because I see companies which go on the stock market, stock exchange these days. They, if they have hydrogen in their name, they go like rockets, And it seems like the question you asked in the start, that where should I go if I was an entrepreneur and had an idea about some floating device? I would say it's probably the best time ever to get this kind of funding towards a commercial product. So there are some conflicting messages here.
We're almost done, but Patrick, you wanted to just have a response to that? And
Yeah,
make
no,
it,
just
if
to
we
say, I
can
mean,
make it
I
short.
absolutely agree with Niels, of course, that I would love to see more public, private, and philanthropic investment into clean energy, and we're exploring every avenue. So I'm not satisfied with the status quo. I think Niels is absolutely right that we do need collectively, and I think everyone in this panel would agree, to push for more clean energy innovation investment across the board. And I also agree with him in an earlier remark that he made about the importance of the emerging discussion on this taxonomy on sustainable finance, which I think is increasingly going to help us to frame the debate about what constitutes genuinely added value in terms of investment into climate and sustainable issues, not only for the financial markets and private investors, but also, I hope, increasingly for the public sector as well.
And I just, in a couple of words, I wanted to just ask this question from Christopher Jones again to you, Mechthild, because it mentions hydrogen. What's the most promising emerging tech regarding hydrogen? So just in a couple of words, what's caught your eye about that might change the game with hydrogen?
Thank you, Christopher, for the question first. I think on hydrogen, let's be realistic. I mean, today, hydrogen is produced mainly out of fossil fuels, mainly gas, a little coal where you are. It depends where you are. So we have to change that. There is as I said, there's massive strategies to invest basically in sustainable hydrogen, and that there are two ways right now. It's the electrolyzers, so with renewables, or you capture and store, so you combine it with CCS. It depends on the region. Europe is very well placed with abundant and cheap growing renewables, and they want to go more for the green hydrogen. Other regions as well, Chile, Canada, and so on. There are regions in the world who would like to go and keep it with gas and CCS, at least for the foreseeable future. And that's cheaper as well in those regions. Let's not forget that for the time being, renewable hydrogen is more expensive than any other form of hydrogen. So globally, in a net zero world, I think we need both, with a certain focus, obviously, on green hydrogen, depending on the region, but certainly for Europe. So I think the strategies we see right now needs to be implemented. And coming back to one of your questions on the investment side, I would agree that it hasn't been up to the objectives in many ways. COVID 2020 has shown it has been even more difficult, but there's some hope and some good news if you look at the recovery plans. If the European finance goes through, there is a lot being reserved for any energy and climate framework. Other countries, another region over the world are also putting more money on clean energy investments in their recovery plans. So that needs to happen now in order to boost, including green hydrogen.
Thank you so much, Mathilde. That's all we have time for. Thank you to all of you for this fascinating and engaging and enlightening discussion. I want to close on the note of hydrogen because our poll has wrapped up, and according to 176 of our listeners, according to 33% of them, hydrogen is the most has the biggest potential to change the game and help us reach net zero emissions. That's followed by carbon capture and storage and solar, both on 18%, wind on 16%. 8% of you thought nuclear fusion, and 6% on other renewables. I guess in closing, just to say my main takeaway from this discussion, and thank you to all of you, the thing that I've really learned and has been really impressed on me is that from the perspective of the experts, we need all of these technologies and we need to be funding them and supporting them, and that's the way. We're not going to get to net zero if we focus in on a narrow range of technologies. So and that's a really, really interesting takeaway for me. I hope you have all enjoyed this discussion too. Thank you so much, Remy, Patrick, Niels, Mechtild, for being on our panel. And Annie made this panel possible. And thank you so much to all of you for joining us. If you have feedback, please email us, events@politico.eu. Throughout this time, when we're all online, Politico will continue to be hosting virtual newsmaker events, panels, discussions with fascinating people. So please keep joining us, stay tuned, and enjoy your Christmas, of course. And our future events, if you want to go onto the Politico website, politico.eu/events/future-events. So thank you and good afternoon.